Well, good morning, everyone. It's really good to see you. And we're going to be continuing our series in a moment or two. We're almost at the end of this series, so we've done 5 of these 7 churches already, and we're coming to the 6th church of the 7 that Jesus addresses at the beginning of the book of Revelation, the last book of the Bible. So it'd be great if you turned to it, if you had Revelation chapter 3 in front of you, because in a moment or two I'm going to read to you from that. And throughout this sermon I'll be making reference to the Bible, and you need to be checking it out that I'm actually staying faithful to what it says, because it's what the Bible says rather than what I say that's important. Just while you're turning to it, there's a couple of little things I wanted to draw your attention to. First of all, I've been reading this book, which I made reference to a few weeks ago actually, Confronting Injustice Without Compromising Truth. And we're living in a culture which is increasingly concerned with justice, which in principle is a very good thing. But there's a lot of approaches to justice out there, and not all of them are framed by a Christian perspective. And this book, I think, does a pretty good job of taking seriously the questions of justice that our culture is raising, but applying Christian perspectives to how we understand them and address them. So I just wanted to recommend it to you if it's an issue that you grapple with, and if it's an issue that at times is overwhelming, because contending with issues of injustice and sort of unfairness. I mean, that's a huge issue. When we're confronted with the things that people face, it can feel completely overwhelming. So I recommend that book to you as a good place to sort of start getting your thoughts aligned with Scripture. Speaking of injustice, poor Jenny Giles has been married to Chris for 40 years today. No, sorry, that's not the right way to introduce that at all, is it? Chris and Jenny Giles are celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary. Is it today? Today. God bless both of you. Yeah, Chris is... do give them your congratulations afterwards, and we're celebrating with you today. What a great thing to be celebrating. I entitled this sermon, How to Recognize a Church That Pleases Jesus, because this church in particular, Jesus says nothing bad about them at all. If last week there was a church that Jesus didn't say anything good about, this church Jesus says only good things about. So in one sense, it's a very encouraging passage. We're looking at Revelation 3, verses 7 to 13, and it addresses the church in Philadelphia. Incidentally, Philadelphia literally means brotherly love, which is also encouraging. This is the church of brotherly love. And just to remind you, next slide please, the background to these 7 messages to the church is John receiving a vision of Jesus standing among lampstands holding stars in his hands, which pictures Jesus walking among the churches. And it's a lovely image for us to think of, even today, that Jesus is walking among all the churches in Purley, across the United Kingdom, right around the world. Jesus is in the midst of his churches. It's a deeply encouraging thing, but it's also quite a challenging thing, because Jesus not only encourages what he sees that is good and faithful, but also we know from these scriptures he has got his eye on stuff that is not so good. And so he challenges and indeed brings judgment on those things that are not good. His judgment, by the way, is not to condemn, it is to discipline. But also, he is very gracious. And as we'll see in a moment in this church, he has a lot to commend. Next slide, please. I've said now several times that the 4 aspects or the 4 characteristics of a church that pleases Jesus, according to what Jesus says to these churches, are churches that are zealous for truth, for the truth of the gospel, what the apostles taught, which is recorded for us in the New Testament, zealous for truth in the face of spiritual confusion, zealous for purity, moral purity and particularly sexual purity, zealous to love God, his people and his world, and fourthly, prepared to count the cost of discipleship, including suffering for their faith. And as we read now in a moment this passage addressed to the Church of Philadelphia, what we're going to see is that they are particularly commended for number 1 and number 4. All right, so we're going to pick up in this passage that Jesus commends them for their commitment to staying close to the truth, and secondly, because they are prepared to count the cost of suffering. So let's read it together. Revelation 3, verse 7, to the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, "These are the words of him who is holy and true." So that's a reference to Jesus. "Who holds the key of David. What he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open. I know your deeds. See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. I know that you have little strength, yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. I will make those who are of the synagogue of Satan, who claim to be Jews though they are not but are liars, I will make them come and fall down at your feet and acknowledge that I have loved you. Since you have kept my command to endure patiently, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that is going to come on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth. I am coming soon. Hold on to what you have so that no one will take your crown. The one who is victorious, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. Never again will they leave it. I will write on them the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which is coming down out of heaven from my God, and I will also write on them my new name. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit is saying to the churches." All right, this is God's holy and powerful word, and we start then with an introduction to Jesus as being holy and true and the person who holds the key of David. And this is picking up an allusion, a reference in Isaiah, where a particular individual is pictured as having been given the key to the house of David and therefore having sort of delegated authority over pretty much everything in Israel. But here that is picked up in such a way to say that Jesus holds the key to open and close people's way to salvation and ultimately their way into the New Jerusalem. What is a key? Essentially, a key is authority. It's power to do something. In itself, a key is not very powerful, but a key is, I remember hearing Jack Dee, the comedian, once joking that if you've got a big bunch of keys, that means you're important. And in the workplace, the bigger your bunch of keys that you have hanging from your belt, the greater your importance. Well, be that as it may, a key is a sign of authority. You only get a key if you are being given permission to access something. And if you're the person who controls access, then obviously you're a person of authority. Jesus, to open doors, and when he has opened a door, we are told, no one can shut it. And when he locks a door, no one can open it. He is the final authority. And in this particular case, we are talking about the way to the kingdom of heaven, the New Jerusalem, salvation. Only Jesus can open that door. And if Jesus shuts that door, you are forever shut out. So it speaks of authority. Next slide, please. And that begs the question, Jesus can open that door. And if Jesus shuts the door, you're shut out forever. Then clearly what's being presented here is the most important thing in life is your relationship to the Lord Jesus. and you initiate relationship with him by bowing the knee before him, not only as the King in glory, but as the crucified one who died for you and for me. Now, the background to this passage is opposition and persecution. You will have picked that up as you went through it. Jesus saying to this church, you've kept my command to endure patiently. And there's obviously a background of strife with Jews in the city. The Christians and those Jews who aren't Christians, because there would have in all likelihood been Jewish Christians in the church, there's strife. And this is not unusual. If you read the book of Acts, for example, Paul, when he's planting churches, will often go into the synagogue and preach to them and start telling them that their Messiah has arrived. And what normally happened was that kind of split the synagogue, with some of the Jews who were listening to Paul going off with Paul to be part of a new church, and some of the Jews not accepting Paul's message and usually then stirring up trouble by going to the Roman authorities and sort of disowning the Christians, and often then that could lead to some form of persecution. And it seems something like that has happened here. Furthermore, we know that somewhat earlier than in all likelihood these words were written, Christians were getting kicked out of synagogues. So if they were still trying to worship within the synagogue system as Christians, the Jews began to kick them out of the synagogues. And so the background here in all likelihood is that these Christians who are in this church at Philadelphia, the Jewish ones, and there would have been Gentiles as well in all likelihood, but the Jewish Christians have probably been evicted from the synagogue, and there is strife with those Jews that are not Christians. Now, it's worth just reflecting on this a little further, particularly in light of the grievous rise of anti-Semitism in Europe. Because if you're sensitive to that, and I hope you are, then there is a danger in reading these words that we read them as though Jesus is saying that he is against Jewish people, or that all Jews are under his judgment. Now, of course, that can't possibly be true, not least because John himself was Jewish, and he's writing the thing. Jesus himself is Jewish, according to his earthly ethnicity, and there were many ethnically Jewish people in the churches. What's being referred to here is not Jews by ethnicity, but Jews who have set themselves up in opposition to God's purposes in the church and have behaved cruelly to the Christians. And so it's those who claim to be authentically the inheritors of the Jewish religion, and Jesus here is saying they are not, because they have rejected their own Messiah. It's very important that, because historically passages like this have been used to justify anti-Semitism, and that is to misread them. It is a context where Jews were persecuting Christians that brought this language about. Now, more broadly, persecution. There's a historical context to this persecution, but churches right around the world today, right now, Christians right around the world are facing persecution. We don't face any persecution to speak of in the West. But I hope the Bible does teach that we should be concerned, we who live in comparative comfort and safety, we should be concerned about our brothers and sisters who are facing persecution. In just a few weeks' time, actually, it will be the International Day of Prayer for the Persecuted Church, and we'll be privileged to have a representative from Christian Solidarity Worldwide coming and preach to us and give us a focus on this. But I do hope and encourage you to be informed about the persecution that our brothers and sisters are facing, for two reasons, really. One is we should be concerned for their sake. We should be praying for them. They're our brothers and sisters. So I hope, for example, that perhaps you are keeping yourself informed by perhaps staying in touch with Christian organisations that work amongst those who are being persecuted in this way. Christian Solidarity Worldwide, Release International, or Open Doors. Any of those three organisations I strongly commend to you. They do excellent work right around the world, trying to help, yes, Christians, but in Christian Solidarity Worldwide's case, actually trying to help anyone who is being unjustly persecuted because of their religious belief. Can I have the next slide, by the way, please? So for their sake, we ought to be concerned. We should be seeking to alleviate their suffering and pray for them. Interestingly, it seems to me that whenever people in situations of persecution are asked, they always want our prayers. And we should give them our prayers, right? And secondly, the thing that more often than not, when I'm reading what they're asking for prayer for, is they ask for prayer that they would remain faithful, which is such a challenge, isn't it? Because we imagine that if we were in that situation, we would just want an escape. But more generally, I think persecution has this effect, and I can't speak from experience here, obviously, but I think it sort of acts to cut away sort of nominal faith. It cuts away lukewarmness. It poses an immediate question of how serious are you? And I guess the ones that endure under persecution, self-evidently, are the serious ones. And what they're primarily concerned with is the strength to endure. So we should be praying for them, that God would give them strength to endure. But the other reason we should be concerned for them is for our sake. Because they act to refine our faith and remind us of what is important. We get hung up in our Christian faith on all sorts of sideshows. I think it's one of Satan's favourite tricks is to divert us into secondary matters. And before we know it, in churches, goodness, I'm sure you could do this exercise too. Draw up a list of the things that you've heard people fall out about in church. There would be some quite remarkable things. I know of one church that I was involved in at one point where there was fairly tense church meeting about what colour they were going to paint the auditorium. And it's human, isn't it, to get distracted. Persecution, when we consider the persecuted church, we suddenly realise a whole load of things we thought was important are not important. It helps us to regain our perspective, and it challenges our lukewarmness. We need to learn from our Christian brothers and sisters who are going through things we would very much prefer not to go through, but we do need to be inspired by them. So for their sake and for our sake, we should be involved with our persecuted brothers and sisters. And what we read then of this particular persecuted church is, first of all, superficially they are unimpressive. Next slide, please. It's a contrast to last week. Those of you who were here or you've heard the sermon from last week know that Jesus said to the church in Sardis, "You have a reputation for being alive, but you are dead." This church, Jesus says, "I know that you have little strength." Little strength. But nevertheless, you've endured. So they are, presumably little strength means there's not many of them maybe, and they don't look particularly impressive. You imagine if we went to parts of the world where the church are persecuted and they've endured suffering, we would often find little groups of believers meeting secretly. If they had any band at all, they'd have to play extremely quietly. In all probability, there is no band, right? The worship is done very quietly, just with spoken prayers. They may not even have a Bible, or they've got to be very careful how they interact with the Bible. They can't be seen with the Bible. The word may be very simple. I don't suppose there's lots of jokes and razzmatazz to keep the whole thing moving along nicely. There's perhaps underlying fear. This is not the sort of church that most pastors in the Western world are trying to build. And it would look unimpressive to us. You know, we want to it can be very easy for us to get quite secular in our thinking and try to become impressive in the world's terms. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking any of these things that we use to hopefully help us in our worship. And actually, many of those in parts of the world where they are being persecuted would long for an experience approximating to what we enjoy in our church services. But nonetheless, it's another reminder that we need to be careful how we assess the spiritual power of the church. All that glitters is not gold. In verse 10, Jesus says, since you have kept my command to endure patiently, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that's going to come on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth. Next slide, please. Some have interpreted this to be something to do with the end times and see Jesus not actually addressing the church in Philadelphia here anymore, but addressing the church way, way, way in the future. I personally think that that's unlikely. I think Jesus is speaking to a real church that existed at that time. So these words are no less than any of the others addressed to this church. So presumably Jesus knew there was some great catastrophe about to come on the Roman Empire at the time. Often there in the New Testament, at other points in the New Testament at least, a reference to the Roman Empire is meant by a reference to the whole world. These two is sort of hyperbole. And Jesus says, I'm going to protect you from something that's coming that's going to affect the whole world. Now, we don't know historically what that relates to. Looking back, people have speculated what it might be. But it does raise for us the point that Jesus does step into history to protect us. Now, obviously, we don't actually know what he protects us from because we don't experience it. It's my conviction that when we get to the new creation and we look, if indeed we look back on our lives, we'll see that at various points Jesus protected us from all sorts of things. Protects us from temptation. I mean, after all, the Lord's Prayer, deliver us from evil. I wonder what Jesus is protecting us from right now. We don't know, do we? But we certainly should pray for his protection. I like this thought that I do live under the canopy of his protection. I sometimes forget it, I get anxious, but actually I need to be reminded, Jesus is protecting me, he is my shield. All right. The only command Jesus gives them is to hold on to what you have so that no one will take your crown. Next slide, please. Probably the crown is a reference to an athletic prize, because the next verse goes on to say, the one who is victorious. So the suggestion is that we need to run so that we don't lose our victor's crown. We need to hold on, keep going. I kind of like this image of the Christian life, which comes up a lot. When I was younger, I was not particularly talented at sport, but I was very enthusiastic. And I particularly warmed to sports that require no real finesse or talent, but just determination. Because I think, well, determination, anyone can have that, can't they? I mean, that just requires that you're willing to try hard. It doesn't require any great talent. So hence, I've always sort of enjoyed, although never been the best at it, but enjoyed long-distance running. Because I think, well, At one level, it's not hard to do. I mean, it does require a lot of commitment. But other than that, all you really have to do is keep putting one foot in front of the other. And as long as you do that for long enough, you will complete the race. And Christianity does not require any great talent. It just requires us to do a long obedience in the same direction, as Eugene Peterson famously put it. It's faithfulness that Jesus is looking for. Again and again, the metaphors for the Christian life are about standing firm, holding fast. Pictures that are about not you don't have to be a superstar, you just have to be a normal person that Jesus grabs hold of, commit yourself to him, and keep walking steadily. This church are unimpressive, but Jesus commends them for their faithfulness. And he says, keep walking steadily. It's also true in the church quite often, and I think Christian leaders are guilty of this sometimes. They almost give the impression there's early stage Christianity and then there's some higher level you can go on to in some way. Never listen to that stuff. The Christian life is all about taking the grace that you receive, the truth of the gospel, in the power of God's Spirit, and just walking it out for the next decades until you either go to be with the Lord or he returns. That's it. You don't get onto some higher level of Christianity. Yes, as time goes by, the Lord is sanctifying you by his Spirit. You should see growth in your ability to be obedient and some sinful patterns of behavior and thinking dropping away, God willing. But Christianity is the long obedience in the same direction. At one level it is unspectacular, but it is about faithfulness, holding fast, standing firm, one foot in front of the other. And it ends with a victor's crown. Now, Jesus says, hold on to what you have because I am coming soon. Now, from a human perspective, he didn't come soon when he wrote these words, from our perspective, because we're here 2,000 years later and he hasn't come back yet. But two things on that. One is, elsewhere in the New Testament, Jesus is really, or the scriptures are really clear that God's perspective on these things is very different to us. What looks soon to God does not look soon to us. But I do want to just bring out the fact that I think Christians are meant, and it's quite clear from this passage and many others, to live in the imminent expectation of Jesus' return. Now just think about this for a moment or two. If you knew Jesus was coming back on Wednesday, what would you do between now and then? Or if you knew he wasn't coming back for another 1,000 years, how might that affect how you lived? My guess is if you knew that he was coming back on Wednesday, you'd start running around like a headless chicken, wouldn't you? I hope you would. If you've got any real faith in these things, you would draw up you wouldn't sleep between now and Wednesday, would you? You'd be thinking, I've got to get everything in order. If you knew he wasn't coming back for 1,000 years or 10,000 years, who knows? I think you might be tempted to get a bit complacent. Now, I think there's a reason why we're not told when Jesus is coming back, because I don't think Jesus wants us running around like headless chickens, and I don't think he wants us to be complacent. He wants us to commit to a long obedience in the same direction. But it is important to remember, he might come back before the end of this service. And for those who don't know him, as the New Testament has said, and he himself said, he will come like the thief in the night that they're not ready for. It is a threat if you're not ready. It's a moment of existential despair for those who suddenly realize what they could have had and they lost it. because they gave more attention to things that are not important. But for those who gave up everything to have the pearl of great price, the return of Jesus, is when every hope and dream is realized. I'm coming soon, he says. And then in the rest of this chapter, we get really some mysterious words about what's coming for us. First of all, there's a reference to the New Jerusalem, next slide please, that is coming down out of heaven with Jesus to take up its residence on earth. I looked up New Jerusalem on Google. There were all sorts of pictures. They were largely sort of depictions of an ancient city. And I just wanted to, I went for this one because it's sort of it's a sci-fi city. And I wonder what your expectation is. I wanted to subvert these kind of archaic ideas that we might have about what the New Jerusalem is like. I'm not for 1 minute suggesting it will actually be like that, but it at least gets you thinking. What are you expecting? I certainly hope you've got beyond ideas of floating around on harps. I mean, that is just a travesty of what the Bible is suggesting is going to happen. A city is coming down out of heaven. It's described in all sorts of symbolic ways in the New Testament, particularly in Revelation, of course, later on. And this city is going to be a city of worship, a garden city, beautiful. We'll have embodied lives there, living eternally. I imagine there will be work still to be done, but it will be fruitful, life-giving work. There will be relationships of a quality that we cannot yet grasp. There will be whole worlds to explore and learn about. This is coming our way. And then lastly, we're told that Jesus will write on us a new name. Next slide, please. I wonder what you think about the contemporary re-emergence of tattoos. They're very popular nowadays, aren't they, tattoos? And some of us will have been brought up in Christian settings where Christians don't get tattoos because it says in Leviticus or wherever that you shouldn't. And others maybe have a different perspective on this. This person has obviously gone for a tattoo that reminds them they're a Christian and that they're owned by Jesus and they're grateful for the cross. My daughter has got herself a little fish symbol on her arm, partially because then she's a nurse and she says when I treat patients they often ask me about it, and there's my opportunity to tell them that I'm a Christian. Jesus is going to, at least, we don't know if this is literal or a metaphor, but in some mysterious way he will write his name over you when you meet him. It says it's a new name, we don't know what it is yet, but you'll be his forever and he will claim personal ownership. Actually, if you're a Christian, he's already done that, but somehow that will be consummated in the new creation. This is a church that pleases Jesus because although in human terms they are unimpressive, they hold on to his word. They stay true to him. They keep walking steadfastly. They show determination and commitment. And that is a church that pleases Jesus. God bless you.